Greetings and blessings, YouTube. This is John the Jansenist, back from a rather long sabbatical. I actually came across a blog fairly recently, and apparently, according to what I have read since, this is apparently a very popular blog in Catholic circles. It is one run by Father Ray Blake, and he is the ministering priest at a church in Brington, England, if I recall correctly. And the name of his church is St. Mary Magdalene's Church, so to speak, of Brington. Let us dispense with any formal introductions and just get right down to it here. Mr. Blake has gotten my attention because he has written a blog about Jansenism. My interest in anything other than that, insofar as Catholic history goes, is fairly minimal, at least insofar as the last 400 to 500 years is concerned, primarily because there isn't really much to understand. The Roman Church as it exists today is largely a church interested in impressing itself with its elaborate sacramental system to the point where they've elevated it to an actual object of worship rather than a means to express worship. And we get a full dose of that in this rather disgusting blog. And I say disgusting not because I'm personally insulted by it, but because I think the intelligence of any well-read biblical and Christian history scholar has been insulted by it. At least if we take the word of the online sources that I have read, that this guy is some kind of an authority on anything other than administering the Mass for pay. The title of this particular blog, and I have a link in the description, is Save the Liturgy, Save the World, parentheses, from Jansenism. Notice something. Save the liturgy, as if the liturgy itself is what can save the world. No talk whatsoever about the grace of God, the will of God. No, it's the liturgy. I will make no secret of the fact that I think that correct liturgy is essential to a proper expression of love of God. Be that as it may, though it be essential, it is by no means in and of itself sufficient, as this blog would seem to indicate. And now, with further ado, I will begin reading this, and I will be making additional comments along with it, so feel free to read it for yourself, free of my comments if you so choose. The bleakness of the Irish institutions where abuse took place seems to reflect the theology of those who ran them. There is no Baroque exuberance, no time of festivity, just grinding tedium where the norm is fast and penance mitigated by an occasional feast which is itself yet another penitential act. The pictures of these institutions show no sign of the Catholic sun shining, and black tea is served instead of good red wine. There is indeed only Calvinist gloom. One simply can't imagine a sense of festival that is more than an empty mouthing of the Gloria in these grim mills. I am going to stop right here. As someone who is of majority Irish extract, I find this opening paragraph both amusing and in many ways indicative of English arrogance. The English, by and large, if history serves me correctly, are often very impressed with their own pleasantries. They are just enamored with their own ability to throw a good party. And while I'm not one to deny someone their good fun, I must object to the notion that some sort of Calvinistic gloom. Now remember, Calvinist is code for Augustinian. It's a derogatory jab at the theology of St. Augustine. That's exactly what it is. The Roman Church lionizes him as a saint, but they excoriate him as a theologian with every single word out of their mouths. Augustinian monasteries are not all that common anymore in the Roman Church, and when they sprout up, they are often islands unto themselves, sharing only in common with the other particular institutions that they share affiliation with their subjugation by the papacy. No, my friend, Mr. Father Ray Blake, the Catholic sun is not shining in Ireland because there is some sort of grand Augustinian conspiracy to keep the Catholic churches of this nation out of the grandeur of the British Empire. There is no Catholic sun shining in this country because your country, England, spent the better part of 400 plus years pillaging and raping the country. This is me, the Irish national, speaking here now. This is proven history. Everybody likes to talk about the Great Potato Famine. There was no famine. Not in the sense that the term would suggest. There was a famine in the sense that there were a people that were beaten and broken into submission by overtaxation, confiscation, and outright theft by their English occupiers. And this country, Ireland, the part of it that broke away, has been spending about 100 years trying to recover from that tyrannical rule and that subjugation. Mr. Blake, you may go about your entire life living in ignorance of history, but don't come to me and tell me that a country that barely knew Jansenism is somehow the victim of it. When you see these bleak images of Ireland, you're seeing a country that has been condemned to poverty by force from outside influences, specifically that of Britain. Anyway, I've gotten that little bit of sour grapes out of the way. Let us continue. People have suggested that Jansenism lies behind the appalling accounts of dehumanization and abuse. What type of anthropology lies behind Jansenism? There is a heightened sense of sin, sin which cannot be overcome, but only beaten into semi-containment. There is a division of humanity into the saved and the damned, with the majority being damned. There is a tendency to see the poor, the weak as being damned, or at very least as being beyond the influence of grace. I'm going to stop right there. This again plays into the idiocy and the uppity nature of a English priest who has probably known little else but wealth his entire life, talking down to people of real religious piety as though they think the poor are damned. Let me tell you something, Mr. Blake. The people that you are condemning as being Jansenists, they were dirt poor compared to you. So by natural consequence, they must have seen themselves as being damned, which would beg the question, if they already see themselves as damned, then by what good purpose would they even be at Mass? You see, this is the misunderstanding that Rome has always had with Augustinian theology. It is not fatalistic. It is simply in complete deference to the sovereignty of God's will. Nothing more, nothing less. We are more aware of sin than the current Roman institutions are, and that's probably the reason why organized crime doesn't find as cozy of a home in old Catholic churches as they do in Rome. Just a little jab at the cultural ancestry of the church that Mr. Blake belongs to, since we're in the area of taking jabs at each other from a historical context. But continuing. Victims are damned, abusers are damned. Grace is given so sparingly by a God who is mean with both love and grace, and man he is made in the same niggardly image. Very colorful metaphor there. God is not merciful and forgiving, but full of anger and rage, swift to condemn, waiting to punish. Pray tell, Mr. Blake, have you actually read the scriptures? If you did, you might come to realize that you're pretty much condemning 90% of it. At least insofar as the Old Testament is concerned, and to a large extent the New Testament also, maybe not quite as much. Continuing. The wounds of the Son are not salvific, but condemnatory. Both victims and abusers are left for that. All right, I have to stop right here. This is ridiculous. The wounds of the Son are not salvific. I'm sorry. The expiatory forgiveness that we are given by the blood of Christ on the cross is the only salvific thing that we are concerned with, Mr. Blake. You're concerned with all this other nonsense that you've been rambling on and on about here, this grand Baroque majesty that you expect out of cathedrals, particularly out of poor, humble Irish people who barely have 2 pence to rub together while you sit in your ivory tower eating chicken and drinking good red wine. Continuing. The hell of now is but a foretaste of the hell to come. It is in this image man is created. Oh, dear Lord. This man is not book savvy. Both Bayanism and Jansenism state very clearly that man was not created in the image of being fallen. It was via the sin of Adam that this occurred. Definitely didn't pay attention at Sunday school. I wonder how the heck somebody like this gets approved as an ordinate priest. Anyway, continuing. One has the vision of Jansenist liturgies, celebrate perfunctorily in a damp chapel, poorly furnished, with no joy, with no expense. What are they going to spend the money on? You took it all from them. Continuing. With no understanding, with a mistrust of any movement of the heart. One is left with a vision of liturgy, neither touching nor being touched by the divine. In the usus antiquitor, low mass in every sense, and in the usus resentitor, functionary anthropocentricity. In layman's terms, he's complaining about the fact that the Mass is too plain. Continuing. The rhythm of the Church's liturgy of feast and fast is supposedly to give us an insight into God. It is supposed to save a fallen world. It is meant to give us to celebrate what God has made us. In the liturgy, we join with our brothers and sisters, the saints united with God himself, but if our liturgy of God's has gone awry, then so does understanding of man, and so does our worship. No real disagreement with there, although your definition of what is proper liturgy is something that is reserved for wealthy saps like yourself. Poor little me, I can't afford the fancy golden chalices, so I have to make do with what I have. The same with my poor country of origin. Continuing. The phrase, save the liturgy, save the world, is not a platitude or an empty slogan. Personally, I think it is, but continuing. The liturgy forms our understanding of God, of the Church, of ourselves, and of our neighbor. The liturgy has become, in the last 40 years, reflective of what is deep inside of us, but in the first millennium, the liturgy formed those who took part in it. Hence, in Northern Europe, monastic liturgists were the great missioners. Now, let us proceed forth with this in mind, with regards to this last paragraph here. Monastic liturgists were necessary primarily because most of Europe, and Northern Europe in particular, were not literate, and they were particularly not literate in Latin, which was the only language that the Bible was readily available in. We did not have access to the Masoretic texts on a regular basis, save a few scholars that were fluent in Hebrew, and they were few and far between. And we did not have the Septuagint or most of the Greek texts because they were in the East, well removed from where anybody in Scandinavia, Germany, France, or Britain could get to them. And when it came time for the printing press to be invented and we had access to the Bible in the vernacular, those same monastic liturgists were the first persons to cry foul because their usefulness had supposedly come to an end. To which I simply state the following. The most important aspect of Christianity is the gospel. If not for the gospel, we would not have the liturgy, we would not have the Eucharist, we would not have confession, we would not have baptism. We would have none of it. Nothing of any sacramental value comes from anywhere except Christ himself. He spoke of these things, he commanded these things in the name of the Father, and thus we have them. The crime that the Jansenists committed, my good friend Father Ray Blake, is not that they were trying to destroy the Mass, but they were trying to make it comprehensible to Catholic laymen. You constantly gripe and complain in other blogs that Jansenists are some sort of wealthy elite class, and yet you moan and complain that we had the audacity at that point in time in history to offer the poor and common folk something that they could actually read in order to determine whether or not they were among God's chosen. If anyone who reads what I've written on my various blogs or follows this YouTube channel wonders why it is that I left the Roman Church 4 years ago and why I am where I am now, ignorance like this, not only of religion but of history, is a primary cause. Most of these people running around so self-congratulatory about their faith in a great ivory tower with many wonders of the eye and few of the heart, at the heart of it all, it's simply a shell with nothing else to it. It's empty. It's pointless. It's all grandeur and little substance. For a church that confesses realism to the point where they insist that the bread and wine are actually the body and blood of Christ, and we are to consume them in a cannibalistic act of sacramental redemption every Sunday, there's not really much else real to them, it seems. Not when it comes to understanding of those things which actually do matter. And with that, I conclude this particular talk. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, God be with you all.